"I'm sorry, but we can't just hand out cash to anyone who walks in," said Emily Keller, the bank manager, her voice thick with arrogance as she slid the black woman's withdrawal slip back across the counter. "Especially not amounts like this." Her words echoed through the grand marble lobby of Meridian Financial's main branch, drawing the attention of nearby staff. A few employees had already gathered. One young woman leaned toward a coworker and muttered, just loud enough to carry, "Yeah, right. She doesn't even look like she has that kind of money." A few chuckles followed. Ashley stood still. Her head was high, her expression calm, but each second chipped away at her dignity. What none of these employees realized was that the woman they were dismissing was about to flip their world upside down. The same woman they just assumed didn't belong was actually the one in charge of the entire place. Ever been judged before someone even bothered to know your name or your story? What happened next is one of the most satisfying cases of instant karma you'll ever hear. And if you believe in treating everyone with respect, no matter the color of their skin, drop the word respect in the comments and hit that subscribe button. Now, here's how it all began. A graceful black woman stood quietly at the bank counter. Her posture was poised, her face calm, even though the people around her looked either amused or annoyed. Her name was Ashley Freeman. None of the staff knew it, but 2 decades earlier, she had once stood behind a similar counter, not as a customer, but as a teller trainee, wearing a name badge and a pressed uniform. Ashley's journey from that modest beginning to the top office was nothing short of incredible. She didn't come from wealth or connections. What she did have was grit, intelligence, and relentless determination. She climbed her way up, step by step, from teller to loan officer, then to branch manager and regional director. Every role she took, she excelled. She earned her MBA from Harvard, turned around underperforming branches, and led 3 divisions to record-breaking success. When she became Chief Operating Officer 5 years ago, many assumed she had hit the glass ceiling. But Ashley wasn't done. 3 months ago, the company's longtime CEO announced his retirement. Ashley was the obvious choice. But behind closed doors, not everyone agreed. Some board members hesitated, not because of her experience or performance, but because they worried how big clients would react to a black woman leading the bank. After a tense vote, Ashley was named CEO, making history as the first black woman to head Meridian Financial. In her acceptance speech, she said simply, "I will make sure that every customer, every employee, and every community we serve receives the same level of respect and excellence. No exceptions." And she meant it. Behind the scenes, Ashley had been reviewing complaints and data. Overall, customer satisfaction looked solid, but when she dug deeper, a different picture came to light. Certain branches, especially ones in more diverse neighborhoods, had concerning patterns. The numbers didn't lie. There was a service gap, and it wasn't random. So Ashley took matters into her own hands. Going undercover wasn't a publicity stunt. It was the only way to truly understand what was happening. She chose the downtown flagship branch, led by Emily Keller, a 15-year veteran with a spotless record on paper. Great numbers, lots of new accounts, high performance. But Ashley had noticed something in the raw data. Complaints were few, but exit interviews told another story, especially from customers of color. They often left quietly, saying the service made them feel unwelcome, but rarely giving details. They just took their business elsewhere. On a Tuesday morning at 9:15, Ashley walked through the revolving doors of the downtown branch. She wore a simple navy hoodie, dark pants, a baseball cap, and minimal makeup. Her hair was neatly styled, and her purse, while clean and nice, wasn't a designer label. She looked like any regular middle-class customer. And that was the point. She sat in the waiting area, pretending to scroll through her phone, but she was really watching. And in just 15 minutes, she saw more than any report could have told her. A white man in a designer suit walked through the doors. Before he even made it to the counter, a staff member stepped up to greet him with a bright smile. "Good morning, sir. How can we assist you today?" Without waiting in line, the man was walked straight over to a desk for service. Not long after, an older Asian couple came in. There was no greeting, no smile, just a staff member pointing toward the waiting area and telling them to take a number. Then, a young white woman in comfy weekend clothes walked up to the quick service counter. The teller beamed at her, chatting casually about her weekend. Her transaction took barely 2 minutes. But when a Hispanic man wearing janitor's work clothes stepped up next, the vibe shifted. The teller's tone grew cautious. Suddenly, he was asked for multiple IDs and given a thorough once-over. What should have been a quick check cashing dragged out for nearly 10 minutes. Ashley sat quietly, watching this pattern repeat itself again and again, 6 more times, in fact, before she finally got up to approach the counter herself. She'd already been waiting for 37 minutes, even though the branch wasn't particularly busy. 3 white customers who had arrived after her had already come and gone. When Ashley reached the window, she was met by teller Beth. The friendly smile that had greeted previous customers faded. "How can I help you?" she asked, her voice noticeably cooler. "I'd like to make a withdrawal," Ashley said politely, sliding her ID and withdrawal slip across the counter. The amount was $15,000. Beth's eyebrows lifted just slightly. She looked at the ID, then at Ashley, then back at the ID as if trying to make sure they matched. "That's a pretty big amount," she said, her voice raised just enough for the teller at the next window to hear. "Yes, it is," Ashley replied evenly. "But it's well within my daily limit for this account." Beth didn't say a word. Instead, she turned and whispered to Mark, the senior teller nearby. Mark gave her a look, nodded, and walked over, planting himself behind Beth, towering over the counter. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, loudly enough for the whole lobby to hear, not addressing Beth, but staring straight at Ashley. Heads turned. People paused. An older woman clutched her purse a little tighter. Ashley could feel every stare, every silent assumption, every ounce of suspicion hanging in the air like a weight. Keeping her cool, Ashley placed her bank card next to her ID. "No issue at all. I'm just here to withdraw money from my own account." Mark picked up her ID and looked it over, slow and deliberate. "We've seen some unusual activity on these types of accounts lately," he said, stressing "these types" just enough to make his meaning clear. "We're being extra careful." "And what types of accounts would those be exactly?" Ashley asked, her voice steady. Mark didn't answer. "Beth, can you pull up the account history?" he said instead. "Let's see what kind of transaction patterns we've got here." As Beth typed, another employee wandered over. His name tag read Ryan. He leaned in and whispered something to Mark, but not quietly enough. "Probably one of those money laundering or fake check operations." Ryan glanced at Ashley with a smirk, looking her up and down, her modest outfit, her natural hair. "We just need to verify the funds are really yours," he said with forced politeness. "You understand, it's for your own safety." This wasn't just skepticism, it was humiliation, and it was intentional. Still, Ashley stood tall, her voice clear. "I understand the need for security. I've given you my ID and my bank card. I'm a long-time customer of this bank. I'd like to complete my transaction now." That's when Ryan called over Emily Keller, the branch manager. She strode across the lobby with the kind of confidence that comes from never having your authority questioned. Her expression was a carefully crafted mix of fake concern and superiority. She didn't introduce herself, Didn't ask for Ashley's name, just launched right in. "Ma'am, I understand there's some confusion with your withdrawal." "There's no confusion on my end," Ashley replied calmly. "I'm just trying to access my money." Emily's smile stayed fixed, but it didn't reach her eyes. $15,000 is a lot of cash. May I ask what it's for?" That question, one that hadn't been asked of a single white customer all morning, hung in the air like a slap. The double standard couldn't have been more obvious if it were written in flashing lights. The energy in the room shifted. Conversations faded, keyboards stopped clicking. Emily stared down at Ashley, her face carefully composed, but that trace of disdain peeked through. The whole lobby seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. "Mrs. Freeman," Emily finally said, barely glancing at the ID she held delicately between her fingertips like it might bite. "This kind of amount doesn't seem fitting for someone like you. We take pride in serving a certain level of clientele here, and unfortunately, we're not able to help you." And just like that, the mask dropped. It wasn't about policy or procedure or even security. The real reason was right there, plain as day: prejudice, sugar-coated in corporate lingo. Ashley felt that all-too-familiar tightness in her chest. She'd been here before, countless times. That moment when someone looks at you and decides, without knowing a thing about you, that you don't belong. Behind Emily, the staff exchanged silent looks. Beth, the teller who had first helped Ashley, stared down at a pile of deposit slips she was suddenly very interested in straightening. Her nervous fingers fumbled, her face tight with discomfort, but she stayed quiet. That silence made her part of it. Mark and Ryan, on the other hand, didn't even try to hide their amusement. Ryan chuckled, covering his mouth poorly as if that somehow made it less offensive. Then Ryan leaned in with a smirk, emboldened by the support of his manager. "I'm just curious," he said loud enough for nearby customers to hear. "Did you come into some money recently? A settlement, maybe? Inheritance? Or something else?" He let that hang, the implication unmistakable. Laundering, fraud, because in their minds there was no way a black woman like Ashley could have earned that kind of money through legitimate means. It had to be luck, a fluke, not hard work, not talent, not years of climbing the ladder. At the next window, a young white mom with 2 kids had stopped mid-transaction. She pulled her children in closer, whispering to them. Whether she meant to or not, she was sending a message. Ashley was someone to be wary of, someone out of place. Ashley took a deep breath. Her calm in the middle of all this was almost superhuman. No sign of anger, no raised voice, just steady professionalism. "I'd like to speak to someone who can actually help me complete my transaction," she said clearly. "Someone with the authority to override whatever concerns you might be having." Every word was measured, composed. She gave them nothing they could use against her, no reason to call her difficult or aggressive. Emily's smile twitched. There was a flash of irritation behind her eyes at being challenged. "Ma'am," she said stiffly, "I'm the highest-ranking person here. I'm the branch manager. There's no one else to talk to." Then she leaned in slightly, dropping her voice to a mock whisper that still carried across the counter. The scent of her pricey perfume floated through the air, clearly meant to signal power and class. "You might be more comfortable at the check-cashing place down the street. They're more used to handling your kind of banking needs. You might be able to get 1,000 or 2 there." The comment was so blatant, so insulting, that people nearby actually gasped. Even those pretending not to listen were now fully tuned in. Behind the counter, the normal rhythm of the bank kept going, cash machines humming, quiet footsteps, soft tapping of keyboards. But the atmosphere had shifted completely. Every word, every sneer, Every condescending glance was being recorded by the ceiling cameras. Every angle, every expression, all caught in high def. Ashley glanced briefly at one of those cameras, and something flickered in her eyes. A private understanding. She didn't say another word to Emily. Instead, she reached into her handbag, a simple leather purse gifted to her by her team when she became COO, and pulled out her phone. "Excuse me," she said calmly, stepping slightly to the side, but still in full view of everyone. She began dialing. Ryan elbowed Mark, clearly amused, whispering something that made Mark laugh under his breath. Ryan then started mimicking Ashley's posture with an exaggerated air, sticking his nose in the air and mouthing, "Ashley Freeman calling," like it was some kind of joke. His performance wasn't subtle. It was meant for everyone. Another way to show he belonged, and she didn't. Beth kept her head down, her shoulders stiff. She didn't laugh, but she didn't speak up either. Meanwhile, another customer, an older black man wearing a postal worker's uniform, stood still nearby, watching it all unfold. The look on his face wasn't shock. It was weariness. He'd seen this before. This was Tuesday. This was just what happened when you banked while black. "Yes, hello?" Ashley said into the phone, her voice even more polished now, calm and direct. "This is Ashley Freeman calling." Behind her, the bank's mission statement was printed proudly across the wall in big, bold letters. "Building financial success together with trust, respect, and integrity." The irony practically screamed from the paint. The words on the wall behind them, meant to reflect the bank's values, now felt like a cruel joke compared to what was actually happening. Emily stepped forward, clearly done pretending to be polite. The sound of her heels squeaking on the polished marble echoed through the tense lobby. "I'm going to have to ask you to take your business elsewhere. You're causing a disruption in our branch. Maybe one of the lower-end banks can help you, because we can't." The hypocrisy was unreal. The only real disturbance came from the way staff had handled a regular customer who was simply trying to access her own money. But to Emily, and anyone who saw the world the same way, Ashley's presence alone, her expectation of being treated like everyone else, was the disruption. Ashley stayed on her call, unfazed. "Yes, I'm still at the downtown location." "That's right. They're refusing to process the transaction." Her voice was calm, steady, too calm, and that clearly rattled Emily. She had expected one of two reactions: either an angry outburst she could use as justification to have Ashley removed, or a quiet retreat that confirmed she didn't belong. But Ashley didn't give her either. She stood her ground with quiet strength, and that shook Emily more than yelling ever could. "Ma'am," Emily said sharply, her voice rising, the last bit of professionalism slipping away. "If you don't leave right now, I'll have to call security." Ashley turned slightly, still on the phone, still speaking with clarity and purpose. The ticking of the wall clock sounded louder than ever, counting down the seconds of a moment that would soon be written into multiple HR files. It was 10:17 a.m., a time that would not be forgotten. Emily gave a quick signal to Mark, who picked up the phone to alert security. The energy in the room shifted. Other employees, sensing something serious was unfolding, stopped what they were doing. Transactions paused. Conversations went quiet. All eyes were on Ashley. That's when Ashley spoke into the phone one last time, her words cutting through the silence like a knife. "Victoria, I need you at the downtown branch. Right now." The name landed like a thunderclap. Emily stiffened. Victoria, as in Victoria Porter, head of operations, a top executive. Ashley not only knew her, she had her direct line. For a brief second, Emily's composure cracked. Who was this woman? How did she have such high-level access? She told herself it was probably a bluff, a scare tactic. People like Ashley always claimed to know someone important when they didn't get their way. That's what she thought, until everything changed. Back at the company's headquarters, the executive floor erupted into motion. Victoria Porter stood frozen at her desk, her face going pale the moment she heard Ashley's voice on the other end of the line. She knew that voice better than most. They had worked side by side for years, two women of color climbing through a system never designed for them. They had shattered ceilings, solved impossible problems, and supported each other through it all. "Get me every customer complaint from the downtown branch, every single one, even the informal ones," Victoria ordered. Her assistant scrambled as Victoria grabbed her security badge and tablet. Her heels clicked hard and fast against the floor as she made a beeline for the executive elevator, the one that bypassed every stop and went straight to the lobby. In a nearby conference room, the board of directors had been quietly reviewing quarterly numbers when the live security feed from the downtown branch suddenly filled the screen. "What's going on?" asked Chairman Alexander Prescott, looking up confused. "You need to see this, sir," the head of security replied, voice tense. The board watched in stunned silence. On screen, Ashley Freeman, their CEO, was being humiliated by her own staff. That's Ashley Freeman," one board member stammered. "That's our CEO." "Yes, sir," confirmed the security director grimly. "And it's been happening for the last 17 minutes. No one said a word. They watched the scene unfold in real time, every expression, every word, every act of disrespect captured by the cameras. "Record all of it," Prescott ordered, his voice tight with controlled rage. "Every second, every word, and get legal up here. Now." Back in the downtown branch, the atmosphere shifted again. The air felt colder. Emily's confidence started to fade, her face paling as she began to sense just how badly this was about to backfire. What she didn't know was that every move her team had made that morning had been caught on camera, from the uneven treatment of customers to the barely disguised discrimination Ashley had been quietly observing since the moment she walked in. Every action, every unfair treatment, every moment of biased service had now been caught on camera, clear, undeniable, and ready to be used as evidence. The very system designed to protect the bank from outside threats was about to expose the real danger, what had been happening inside all along. Ashley Freeman stood still, her phone now tucked back into her purse, watching as Emily Keller slowly began to realize just how badly she'd miscalculated. This wasn't just another customer she could dismiss. She had just picked a fight with the CEO. 21 floors up, things were anything but quiet. The executive suite of Meridian Financial had turned into a scene of chaos. In the observation room, where security footage from every branch was usually monitored in the background, tension filled the air. "Pull up every angle we've got," Victoria Porter ordered, her tone sharp and steady, her usual calm replaced by something much fiercer. Dressed in a sharp navy suit, Victoria stood tall, every inch of her radiating urgency. "Get me audio, facial recognition, timestamps, everything." The security team snapped into action, fingers flying across keyboards. One by one, different views of the downtown lobby lit up the screens, each showing a piece of the same awful truth. Ashley Freeman, the CEO, being treated like a potential threat in her own bank. "Camera 3's got the clearest sound," said a young tech, his voice quiet as the full weight of what they were seeing settled on him. "And we've got uninterrupted footage from the second she walked in, 9:15 a.m. Next door in the boardroom, 3 directors who'd been in the middle of reviewing quarterly numbers sat in stunned silence as the live footage filled the massive screen. They could see it all, the smug looks, the dismissive glances, the clear bias in how customers were being treated based solely on how they looked. It wasn't subtle, it wasn't isolated. It was a pattern playing out in real time, and no one could look away. "That's our CEO," confirmed board chair Alexander Prescott, his jaw tight, silver hair catching the light under the overhead screens. Just then, the audio clicked on, right as Emily's voice filled the room. "Those check-cashing places are really better equipped for your needs," she was saying, her tone soaked in fake sweetness and thinly veiled disdain. The room went silent again. This wasn't just bad service. This wasn't someone having a bad day. It was discrimination, blatant and systemic, in the one branch they all thought was the gold standard. "This is happening at our flagship location?" whispered Catherine Reynolds, another board member. Her voice was barely audible, but the question didn't need an answer. They all knew what she meant. If this was happening here, how many other customers across the country were being treated the same way? How many had quietly walked out, too tired or hurt to file a complaint, simply moving their business somewhere else? "Get me Emily Keller's full file," Victoria snapped, already halfway out the door. "I want everything. Employment history, performance reviews, customer complaints, all of it. And call legal. Tell them to meet me downstairs in 15. She moved fast toward the elevator, scrolling through data on her tablet as she walked. At first glance, the numbers from the downtown branch looked strong. High new account openings, solid loan approvals, impressive deposit growth. But when she applied demographic filters, the real picture came into focus. And it was ugly. Emily's branch had the highest rejection rate for minority applicants, the lowest approval rate for loans requested by black business owners, and an alarming rate of customer loss among people of color, 3 times higher than the company average. It had been there in the data all along. The question was, had they all just missed it, or had they chosen not to see it? Back on the lobby floor, things were getting more tense by the second. Emily had called for security. The guard who arrived, Thomas, looked about 25, clearly new to the job, and even more clearly uncomfortable with what he was walking into. He stood stiffly near the counter, eyes flicking between Emily and Ashley. "I need this woman removed from the property," Emily said flatly, still refusing to even look directly at Ashley. "She's causing a scene and won't leave after being denied service." Ashley didn't raise her voice. She didn't move. She simply turned toward the guard and spoke with calm authority. "Sir, I'm a customer of this bank. I'm here to access my own funds. I've shown my ID, I've followed all procedures, and I haven't broken any rules." Thomas looked unsure, shifting awkwardly from foot to foot. He glanced at Emily, then back at Ashley, then at the lobby full of silent, watching customers. Something about this felt off, and he knew it. This wasn't a security issue. This wasn't about safety. This was something else entirely, and even he could see that. His training had covered things like how to handle a robbery or what to do during a fire drill, but nothing had prepared Thomas, the security guard, for this kind of situation. This wasn't about rules or safety. It was a moral mess, and he was right in the middle of it. "Ma'am," he started, clearly unsure, but before he could finish, Emily's voice cut through, sharp and angry. Her face was flushed, her frustration boiling over not just from the situation, but from being challenged in front of her team. "This is a private business," she snapped, "and we reserve the right to refuse service to anyone who may be committing fraud." That word, fraud, hit like a slap. No proof, no reason, just an accusation thrown out casually like it was nothing. But everyone could feel it. This wasn't about fraud. The real fraud was the illusion of fairness, of equal treatment, of a merit-based system. The very ideals this bank claimed to stand for were being stripped bare in front of everyone. Behind Emily, the staff had lined up, literally forming a wall. Mark stood with his arms crossed, his ID badge flipped so no one could read his name. Ryan leaned on the counter, twirling a pen like he had all the time in the world, smirking with thinly disguised contempt. Even Beth, who had seemed uncomfortable before, now stood stiffly alongside them, eyes on the floor. Whether out of fear or pressure, the message was clear. It was all of them against one woman. Around the lobby, other customers had taken notice. Some pretended to stay focused on their banking, sneaking glances toward the standoff. Others watched openly, some with discomfort, some with curiosity, like they were watching a show instead of a real person being publicly degraded. A middle-aged white man, irritated by the delay, stepped forward. "Look, lady," he said, his tone annoyed. "Some of us actually have real business to handle. If you're not going to leave, at least stop holding up the line." He waved his hand dismissively like Ashley was an inconvenience. The bitter irony wasn't lost on her. She thought about all the times she'd sat in meetings preaching the importance of customer care, the hours spent building diversity programs, the policies she'd personally worked to implement. And now here she was, on the receiving end of the very injustice she'd tried to fix. But instead of arguing, Ashley simply raised her phone and hit record. She didn't say anything, just filmed. She captured the staff's stances, the tension in the guard's body, the customer's rude interruption. Every frame documented, every second another nail in the coffin of a workplace culture that had tolerated this behavior for far too long. Emily saw the phone, and her expression darkened even more. The vein in her forehead pulsed visibly. "Recording is not allowed in this facility. That's another violation of our policies," she barked, her voice shaking with frustration. Ashley didn't flinch. "Actually," she replied evenly, "under Meridian Financial's own customer service guidelines, Section 4(3) to be exact, customers are allowed to document any interaction where they feel their rights are being violated." The precision in her response threw Emily off for a split second. How did this woman know company policy that well? And why had she called Victoria Porter earlier? How did she have her number? Who was she? But instead of stopping to think, Emily doubled down. Her voice grew louder as she turned to address the room. "This is exactly what I mean," she said with a forced laugh. "People like this always think they can outsmart the system, always looking for a loophole, acting like they know better than the professionals. And just like that, all the masks dropped. No more talk about security or policy, just open bias on full display, and all of it being recorded by the bank's security cameras and Ashley's phone. Some customers watched with wide eyes. Others looked away, pretending not to notice. Even a few staff members began shifting uncomfortably. This wasn't just awkward anymore, it was out of control. Ryan, who had been so smug just minutes before, now glanced nervously at Emily. Things had gone further than he expected, and even he knew some lines shouldn't be crossed. Not in public, not at work. Beth looked pale, like she might be sick. She had just been following the rules earlier, calling her manager like she was supposed to for a large withdrawal. But this wasn't part of the job description. This wasn't customer service. This was a public takedown of a woman who had done nothing wrong. Only Mark stood firm, arms crossed, face blank. Unbothered, like a human symbol of the system Ashley had been pushing against her entire career. Through it all, Ashley Freeman stood quietly in the middle of the chaos, steady and composed, not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever been overlooked, disrespected, or denied service simply because of how they looked. She held her ground with dignity, waiting. A soft ding echoed from the elevator in the distance. Emily turned her head slightly at the sound, momentarily distracted. There was a subtle shift in the air, like the moment just before a storm rolls in. Then, with a loud crash, the grand doors at the front of Meridian Financial's flagship branch flew open, slamming into the walls and sending a sharp echo through the marble lobby. Heads snapped in that direction as Victoria Porter strode in like a force of nature. As the bank's head of operations, the second highest authority in the company, her presence alone was enough to silence the entire room. She walked with urgency, her heels clapping against the tile like a countdown. "Stop this! Now!" Her voice cut through the room, firm and final. It wasn't a request. It was an order, and it froze everyone in place. Emily's face shifted from frustration to surprise the second she recognized her. Victoria Porter? Here? In person? In 15 years of managing this branch, Victoria had only shown up a handful of times, always scheduled well in advance, always part of some formal inspection or press event. But this visit was different. Victoria wasn't here for a tour. She was here with purpose, and the fury in her stride made that crystal clear. The staff, who had been standing shoulder to shoulder behind Emily moments earlier, started to falter. Ryan's smug grin disappeared. Mark let his arms fall to his sides. Beth looked like she might pass out, the color draining from her cheeks completely. Trying to recover, Emily smoothed her hair and stepped forward with her best customer service smile. "Miss Porter, what a surprise. Is there something I can help with?" Victoria didn't even blink. She raised her hand and motioned toward Ashley. "Do you even know who this is?" The question hit hard. Silence fell like a curtain. Emily glanced at Ashley, then back at Victoria, suddenly unsure. Was she someone important? A friend of the board? A regulator? A high-profile client? Panic flickered behind her eyes as the possibilities raced through her mind. Meanwhile, every customer in the room had stopped pretending to be busy. Some were recording the scene on their phones. An older woman, who had watched the entire situation unfold, nodded in quiet approval, sensing justice was on its way. Thomas, the security guard, took a slow step away from Emily, instinctively distancing himself from whatever was about to come crashing down. Victoria walked toward Ashley, her entire tone shifting. The fire that had been aimed at Emily turned into calm respect as she reached the woman who had been so wrongly mistreated. "I am truly sorry for what you've gone through, especially here," she said, her voice ringing out in the quiet room. Then she turned to face the staff, her posture straight, her face hardening. "This," she said firmly, "is Ashley Freeman. She's the CEO of Meridian Financial. She's your boss." The words hit like a punch to the gut. Emily physically staggered. Ryan's hand shot up to his mouth, eyes wide with horror. Mark went pale, swallowing hard. Beth started to shake, tears welling up in her eyes. Just 3 months earlier, Ashley had stood on stage in the city's grand ballroom, accepting the symbolic key to the company. The chandeliers sparkled above her, cameras flashed, and she became the first black woman to lead a top 10 national bank. The event had been live-streamed to every branch. Emily had watched it with her staff, clapped politely, made a few comments about progress, and apparently either forgot or chose not to recognize her own CEO when she walked through the front doors in everyday clothes. "We've been watching," Victoria said, raising her tablet. The screen lit up with footage from earlier that day, crystal clear. "We've seen how you treated Mrs. Freeman, and how you've treated other customers too." On the tablet, split-screen video played. On one side, a white customer requesting a large withdrawal was helped quickly, with smiles and friendly conversation. On the other, a Hispanic man making the same request was met with suspicion, extra questions, and delay. A well-dressed client escorted directly to an office, while an older black woman sat waiting for nearly an hour just to get basic assistance. The truth wasn't just coming out. It was playing on loop in high definition for everyone to see. "Every single interaction in this branch is recorded," Victoria said, her voice sharp with controlled anger. "Every one of them." Her tone was steady, but you could feel the weight behind each word. "And what we've seen here today is a clear, disturbing pattern of discrimination. So obvious, so unacceptable, it doesn't just go against company policy, it breaks federal law." She didn't yell, she didn't need to. With calm precision, Victoria began listing the violations one by one, each one hammering another nail into the coffin of Emily's career. Unequal treatment based on race or perceived social status, inconsistent application of standard verification procedures, creating a hostile environment for a customer trying to access their own funds, making a false accusation of fraud without any evidence. Emily's face had gone beet red. The polished image she'd carefully crafted for years was crumbling right there in the lobby, in front of her staff, her customers, and now, her bosses. "This is all a big misunderstanding," she stammered, nervously brushing her hair behind her ear. No longer a power gesture, just a panicked tick. "We had legitimate security concerns. Large withdrawals always trigger certain protocols." "Save it," Victoria interrupted coldly. "We reviewed video of 3 other large cash withdrawals that went through this morning. You didn't follow any extra protocols with those customers. The only thing you applied consistently today was discrimination." Ryan, suddenly looking nothing like the smug man from earlier, stepped forward, tears running down his face. I was just following Emily's lead," he said, voice cracking. "We're trained to flag suspicious activity. I didn't mean any harm." Mark tried a different tactic, trying to sound calm and professional. "This branch has been a target for scams recently. We were just being careful." "Let's be very clear," Victoria cut in again. "We have access to every email, every memo, every communication you've sent or received within this organization. Don't make things worse by lying." At that moment, the main doors opened again. 3 members of the board stepped into the lobby: Alexander Prescott, Catherine Reynolds, and Dennis Whitehill. Their expressions were serious, and their presence alone made the gravity of the situation crystal clear. These weren't people who showed up for routine issues. If the board was in the lobby, it meant something historic was happening, and not in a good way. The room, already quiet, somehow grew even more still. Customers watched, wide-eyed, as the most powerful leaders in the company moved to stand beside Ashley. It was a silent but unmistakable show of support, the kind Ashley should have had from the start. Through it all, Ashley hadn't said a word. She watched everything, not with vengeance or satisfaction, but with the calm focus of a leader witnessing a failure she now had to fix. This wasn't just about her. It was bigger than that. It was about a broken culture and her responsibility to rebuild it. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm, clear, and carried the kind of weight that doesn't need to shout. "Emily, Ryan, Mark," she said, looking each of them in the eye, "you're terminated, effective immediately. No yelling, no theatrics, just truth, delivered with the quiet authority of someone who'd earned every ounce of power she held. Your behavior today has shown that you are fundamentally out of alignment with the values of this institution and with the law. This is not a suspension. There's no coaching, no second chance. Your employment with Meridian Financial ends here." Emily's face twisted, a mess of shock, shame, anger, and the crushing realization that her 15-year career had just come to a dramatic and very public end. "You can't just she started to protest. Ashley raised one hand, calmly. That was all it took. Emily stopped mid-sentence. "I can," Ashley said simply. "And I have." She turned to Thomas, the young security guard who'd been standing frozen nearby. "Thomas," she said, her tone softening just slightly, "please escort these former employees to collect their things, then make sure they're escorted out." Thomas stood a little straighter, nodding. "Yes, ma'am." As the three now former employees were quietly led to the back to gather their belongings, the rest of the lobby stood in stunned silence. There were no cheers, no applause, just the weight of something deeply important unfolding. Accountability, rare and raw, was being delivered right in front of them. Beth, the teller who had started the whole interaction and had been visibly shaken throughout, stood behind her station, trembling. She looked certain that she'd be next. Ashley walked over, and Beth braced herself. Ashley leaned in, speaking quietly. Her words weren't loud enough for the others to hear, but whatever she said made Beth's eyes widen, not with fear, but confusion. Then, slowly, her shoulders lowered, and her face softened, replaced by cautious relief. Beth nodded several times, wiping tears from her cheeks. It would later be revealed that she was placed on probation rather than let go. Her willingness to admit where she went wrong, along with the visible discomfort she'd shown during the incident, had been noticed by Ashley, and it was all backed up by security footage. In the months that followed, Beth would become one of the bank's strongest voices, pushing for fair and equal treatment of all customers. As Emily, Ryan, and Mark were led past the still-waiting customers, each carrying a cardboard box hastily filled with their personal belongings, the weight of what had just happened settled heavily over the room. This wasn't just some dramatic firing, it was a clear, public line in the sand, a statement. A turning point. Ashley Freeman now stood firmly in the middle of the flagship branch that carried the name of the company she ran, surrounded by board members and executives who had supported her when it mattered most. And every customer in the lobby now understood exactly who was in charge. In a matter of minutes, Ashley had gone from being denied a simple withdrawal to exercising the full authority of her position. And the message was unmistakable. Discrimination would not be tolerated at Meridian Financial. Anyone who practiced it had no place in the organization. Once the terminated employees were gone, a heavy stillness lingered. Customers didn't move. Employees behind the counters stood frozen. All eyes remained on Ashley as she surveyed the space, not with ego or pride, but with clarity. This was her house now. When she finally spoke, her voice didn't carry anger. It carried resolve, the firm, even tone of a leader who had witnessed a deep flaw in the culture and was ready to fix it. She called the remaining staff together in a semicircle, and even those who had been resistant before leaned in, listening. "What happened today isn't just about three people making bad decisions," she said. "It's about the culture that made those decisions seem normal. That ends today." The employees listened quietly, some avoiding eye contact, others nodding, visibly ashamed. For some, it was the first time they'd been asked to truly look at the system they were a part of. Meridian Financial exists to serve every customer with dignity, fairness, and respect, Ashley continued. Those words aren't just part of our mission statement. From this moment on, they will be the standard we measure ourselves by. While Ashley spoke, Victoria Porter was already working behind the scenes on her tablet, activating internal emergency protocols rarely used except in serious crises. She was transferring access credentials, assigning interim leadership roles, and initiating a top-down review of operations. Every branch, every department, every person in this company, Ashley said, will now be evaluated not just by profits, but by how equitably they serve the people who trust us with their money. Beth, still shaken, stood at the edge of the group. When Ashley walked over, the young teller broke down. "I'm so sorry," Beth whispered. "I knew it wasn't right, but I didn't know what to do when Emily and the others—" Ashley didn't dismiss her or brush the apology aside. She listened. And when Beth finished, Ashley responded with empathy and purpose. "Learning to speak up against what's wrong, especially when it's coming from someone in power, is one of the hardest things to do," she said gently. "But it's also one of the most important." What happened next would become legend within Meridian Financial. It would be referenced in training videos, leadership retreats, and onboarding sessions for years. Ashley Freeman, CEO of one of the biggest banks in the country, looked at the young woman who had stood frozen in fear and saw something more than guilt. She saw growth. "Beth," she said, "effective immediately, you're being promoted to interim branch manager." Gasps rippled through the room. Beth's eyes widened. "But I'm just a—" "You're someone who saw that what was happening was wrong," Ashley cut in gently. "Even if you didn't have the power or confidence to stop it at the time, that awareness, that conscience, is exactly where change begins. You'll have training, mentorship, and support. But most importantly, you'll bring the lived perspective of someone who knows what needs to change and why." 3 days later, Ashley stood behind a podium, the Meridian Financial logo proudly displayed behind her, addressing a packed room of reporters. Cameras clicked. Microphones crowded the podium. The press conference had been thrown together quickly, but every word and moment had been planned with care. "Today," she announced with confidence, "Meridian Financial is launching our new equitable banking initiative." Gone was the modest outfit she wore during her undercover visit. Now she stood in a tailored suit, composed and commanding, the face of a company ready to change, led by someone who had lived through the very injustice she now vowed to end. The new initiative was more than just a statement. It came with real backing, a $50 million investment in anti-discrimination training, community outreach, and internal accountability systems. The board members stood on either side of Ashley on the stage, a united front meant to show the public they were all in. What the cameras didn't catch, though, was the heated debate that had taken place behind closed doors. Some board members had initially pushed back, uneasy about the size of the investment and nervous about publicly admitting the bank had failed. It wasn't until Ashley laid out the potential legal, financial, and reputational fallout, backed by undeniable security footage, that they finally came around. And now, here they were, standing with her, at least in appearance, behind the sweeping changes she was driving. "Discrimination in banking isn't just unethical," Ashley said, her voice steady and clear. "It's bad business." Her words rang through the room. "When we fail to treat every community fairly, we miss out on talent, we deny opportunities, and we leave entire futures behind." The cameras shifted to the front row, where a diverse group of guests sat quietly. These weren't just attendees. They were former Meridian customers who had been on the receiving end of the very practices the bank now vowed to change. Michael Mandel, a sharp, successful entrepreneur, had seen his business loan denied 3 times, despite having flawless credit and a rock-solid business plan. Next to him was Elena Rodriguez, whose income should have easily qualified her for premium services, but instead she'd been pushed toward basic accounts. And beside her sat James Chen, who had tried to open a business account but was buried under documentation requirements that hadn't been demanded of other clients. Ashley acknowledged them with a nod. "These individuals have courageously agreed to share their experiences and now serve on our new Client Equity Advisory Board," she said. "Their lived experiences will help shape how we move forward." The press conference made headlines across the country. Not just because Meridian Financial had admitted to discriminatory practices, but because they were putting serious resources behind fixing them. This wasn't a PR stunt. It was real, tangible, measurable. In the weeks that followed, Ashley Freeman became a national symbol of what true corporate accountability looked like. She didn't just talk change, she lived it. Hiring practices were restructured, performance metrics were overhauled. Community investment programs rolled out across underserved neighborhoods. Branch managers discovered that their bonuses now depended not only on profit margins, but on equity-based performance measures. Anonymous customer feedback was analyzed with demographic breakdowns to uncover hidden disparities. Training materials were revamped in partnership with civil rights organizations and regulatory bodies to ensure real impact. And across every branch, a new sign appeared near the teller windows. All customers deserve dignity, respect, and fair service. If your experience doesn't reflect these values, call this number. Underneath it was Ashley Freeman's direct office line. 6 months after the day that changed everything, Ashley once again put on casual clothes and walked into several branches unannounced. But this time, she wasn't going undercover to uncover injustice. She was there to see the seeds of change beginning to bloom and to make sure that what started as accountability had grown into something lasting.